Something that every single human deals with in one way or another is unfairness. Some are born to wealthy parents and fall to the top with payment, while others work their entire lives away just to survive. Some can go tens of years without needing to even glance at a hospital, while others almost live in one. Some are comfortable in their skin from their first moment, while others may never feel that way through their last. In this complex and growing list of factors, we gather some of the conditions which create us. The haves and have-nots of our own lives direct our actions and define our beings, especially as we interact with others to complicate an already messy list known as human life. While the degree of fairness varies so widely across our species, most watching this likely know some unique and valid level of it, from appearance to health to money. I'm sure you've wondered many times, why? We can look at everything around us, examine these conditions closely with all of our heart and mind, and most often return no answer. The unfairness of the world abides by no logic that we truly know. I mean, take for example a car crash. It can happen on almost any road at any time. It could be negligence, laziness, weather, or any number of things for part of the why. But why did we have to be there too? Why right then? Why right there? There is no answer more than chance, at least as far as can be reasonably calculated. So how do we deal with this unfairness that we can't properly nail down? How do we shape ourselves around these conditions? There's a series from over 20 years ago now that takes a unique look at this concept and how we might even abuse that unfairness ourselves, circle it back in and itself to defeat this nonsensical nature for better or worse. Haibane Renmei weaves the tale of the Haibane, of course, these semi-angels living in the town of Glie, a walled city which seems to be a purgatory of sorts. They come into being here in cocoons, emerging with only the feeling that this isn't where they're from and vague memories of a past life in a dream. They're then named for these dreams, like Rakka for falling or Reki for small stones, the few aspects they can recall. Within these walls, there's little strife, with the pleasant town offering all the warmth you'd expect from the picturesque countryside of a corny movie, smiles on the faces passing by as they greet you gently. However, the Haibane are subject to different rules. Most notably, they have an
obligation to only use things that humans no longer need.
This means that their clothes are all secondhand, where they pick out one item at a time on the trips, which then need to be modified to allow for their wings. Wings which are themselves useless, not giving anything in return for all the care they require and obstacle they create. Not even to mention that, in ways we'll come to cover, the wings make it like they have to live with their soul on display. To purchase things in this town, they use vouchers instead of money given to them by the governing Renmei, a mysterious and traditional group. While in their presence, the Haibane can only communicate with bells on their wings. This group also dictates that they work for these vouchers still, and even more that they can only work at specific locations, usually the oldest to serve as an approximation of being secondhand. When not under the town's eyes, they reside in Old Home, an abandoned and almost derelict dormitory on the edge of town, constantly cleaning up the mess and dust left behind in it as it continues to fall apart. Under these guidelines and traditions of the Renmei, the Haibane are specifically subject to a kind of inequality, not a devious or deceptive kind designed to take advantage of them or anything like that, as the townspeople are actually exceedingly kind and often help them out skirting around those rules a bit and actually see them as a sign of good luck. The unfairness is actually more mundane, the kind of stuff of traditions and generations, the background nonsense of society long forgotten and easily accepted. No one is allowed outside the walls of this city, only the toga who come and go to trade, with whom they can't speak, as only the communicator, one individual, is allowed to. This creates a sort of reliance which is never addressed because, well, no one feels a need to address it. Even the ones who kind of dream of finding what's beyond the walls eventually settle for the comfort that they know because, after all, their lives are very peaceful and very fulfilled. But more, it simply doesn't make sense for them to. These are the customs that they have lived their entire lives under. It is how life is. Do they know why they can't leave the walls more than the vague implication of evil? No. But do they truly seek to question that? Also no. As such, there is no real sense to the gentle unfairness that the Haibane feel. Of course, you could point to tradition, as we have, but what is the root of that tradition? It's long gone and no one can tell you, yet it will continue to exist. Why do they have halos? Why do they grow these pointless and painful wings? The implications of flight within the cage of these walls? There is no answer. It simply is that this is the right of their birth. Much like our experiences with time or place or parents, they too would get lost in a fog if trying to really understand the base root of this unfairness. But let's get more personal than that. In an odd way, the unfairness itself becomes the way to cut through fog. It is there, we feel it and know it impacts us, changes our lives and our decisions. Despite being nonsense and abstract, its effects are physical and concrete. It exists and in many ways must continue to exist, like some kind of universal law. So as something so definite, what if it became the reason then? What if instead of looking further back to find our suffering from its purpose, we made that suffering the purpose? For this, we'll look at the contrast between Reki and Rakka. The latter had a comfortable entry into this world. Her cocoon was found before it started to hatch, so when it did, Rakka was surrounded by the other Haibane, taken care of from the moment she entered the world, including the most horrific part of the series early on, the sprouting of her wings. It's something they all experience, where their skin is broken through to make way for these pointless appendages, coating themselves in blood only to have their soul laid bare each and every day for no benefit, taunted with the idea of flight and nothing more for all this pain. Just looking at it, you can imagine how horrific it would feel. Well, it's not pleasant for anyone. Rakka was assisted by Reki the entire time, and once it was over, she spent the entire night cleaning her wings so that they wouldn't stain, something which has to be done right away. Just more reason why these wings are essentially an added aspect of unfairness. But then, it's much more so for Reki. It's ironic that she helps Rakka through hatching so much, because Reki hatched alone. It was a time when Old Home only had two Haibane, the older Kuramori, gone before the series begins, and the younger Nemu, who's still around. With these small numbers, her cocoon just wasn't found until after she'd emerged from it. For days, she was lying on the ground alone, including the sprouting of her wings. She's found in a horrific scene of blood and fluid. Imagine this, having no knowledge of yourself or this world, trapped and exhausted in here, wasting away in a disgusting mess from your own body with only your thoughts and your pain, going over the same ideas again and again to no answer. It's not just physical anguish, but mental torment, almost the embodiment of the unknown that we all fear. Rakka had an indication of everything that would follow, people to prepare her for what to feel and what she should be thinking. Reki was alone, experiencing all this pain with no idea as to what it was, why it was, or when it would stop. And when it was all done, all she could do was stew in her conditions, to sit there and know that from the start she was alone. There's no reason for this, really. Old Home has tons of abandoned rooms, and it was a time where there simply weren't enough occupants to go around and search each one for newborns. She could have been alive in any of them. It just happened to be this one that was out of the way, unnoticed, boarded off, and that no one happened to be going through for any reason. Maybe it was a busy time otherwise too, with the young feathers or something going on in town. We could never say what might have been happening at that point. But even if there was, there would still be no real reason. Okay, it was a busy time, but why did she have to be born in a busy time? It's chance, a question with no answer. You can't even point to the desires of parents since they simply appear. It happened that way just because, the random nature of natural unfairness, a result of nothing more than time and place. So think of how she entered this world, cold, in pain, and alone, with no discernible reason as to why, not even the vague hints of a dream to go off of as she forgets hers, let alone distinct memories. And then when she does meet the others, one of them refuses to really interact with her because of her stained wings, the mark of a sin-bound Haibane, one whose day of flight will never come, further stressing that she's alone. Everyone else will suddenly leave this place, bound by a higher power to do so, and she'll have to watch them all go. Maybe she was meant to be alone as a law of this world, because this would make the unfairness have a reason at least. Instead of wondering why, she could begin to act. She has plenty of painful evidence to say that she was alone, and if that was simply how she was meant to be, then it all makes sense. She's alone because she was meant to be. This isn't a logic which strictly makes her life better, but it does provide some kind of direction in dispelling the random nature of things. It creates action. Instead of struggling to find out who she is amongst all the possibilities, she can lean into this thing, the basis for herself, which is, to her, a fact of the world. She's someone who's alone. It's a shortcut to developing who she is and how she'll live, to putting her actions to a point. And so this is what we see expressed in everything she does as an adult. She works herself harder than anyone else, taking care of everything alone, even scores of the young feathers, or everything surrounding Rakka's hatching because that's her role. She'll have her thumb bitten into to lessen the pain of another, literally taking it as her own, because her purpose is to take those things on for the others, the one who can't ascend heaping on the pain so the others have less weight and can. To let them run off and have fun while she works, the sin-bound loner who has no better outcomes to chase. She'll sit alone in a room and paint the few aspects of her nightmare that she can hardly recall over and over and over, the tragic artist smoking by the open window next to their unfinished piece, brooding about their conditions but using them as fuel nonetheless, the kind of person who must express the suffering since they have no choice in it. It's not a beneficial purpose, but it is a purpose nonetheless, a sort of sense in the nonsense. But what begins to make this mindset worse is how it can cycle back in on itself. The defining trait of her life, the purpose which drives her, is that she is meant to be alone. And this is extended into toiling for others, since for Haibane, being alone eventually means not ascending as the others do. Her feeling pain so that they don't is an expression of this loneliness in the long term. So as she keeps growing and attaining more, her tasks will themselves grow just the same. After all, it's not like she started off by taking care of the young feathers. We even distinctly see her not in the beginning when she was young. And then it probably started to be just a few here and there, and then once she got used to that, a few more, and then eventually it's just her job to do it overall. As she keeps following this purpose, her tasks will reach levels as she grows that aren't reasonable for one person to manage, like this group of unwieldy children she's constantly chasing, or the hatching of Rakka all alone, despite there being other Haibane. As we grow and change from challenge, we can achieve more and usually use other people to facilitate that even further. But since it's a defining part of her doing these things alone to make sense of the world and her place in it, then she can never ask for that help, because asking for help defeats that purpose by making her not alone. Her actions have been spurred on for this reason, but the growth which comes from it begins to defeat itself. So, even though there's a handful of Haibane here to help, Reki stays up all night handling every single aspect of Rakka's entrance to this world, because, while it might be exhausting, it is also required to be validating. The more she suffers alone, the greater her purpose grows, and anytime she asks for help, the more it would shrink, forming this vicious cycle. There's no way to break this mindset as it validates itself over and over again. In a way, it becomes self-created. Not the pain itself, not the origin, but rather the extent that it's taken to. Her behavior makes it worse than it needs to be, exactly because the worsening makes it more valid and purposeful. She begins to create her own evidence for it, not the conditions of her world, but her own decisions leading her down the same path. For instance, she has this interaction with the communicator.
Nemu deserves to take the day of flight with your blessings.
She never voices it, but she is more concerned for you than for herself.
Then are you saying I'm a burden on her?
Nemu's issues are not your responsibility. I am merely giving voice to the thoughts that you have deep in your mind.
He tells her specifically that this is a fear which is wrong. She can't make the worries of others her own issue to bear. Handling the emotions of one person, yourself, is already difficult. We're not made to be responsible for another's wholly too. The best thing she could do is live happily, and Nemu will as well. Yet when she returns to Old Home, she voices exactly this concern to her, that she doesn't want to be a burden on her, and then runs away to leave things at that, where, once it's done, she then continues to say, "Everyone leaves me." It's sad, and some aspects of it can't be helped. But this all isn't anything that had to be. Someone was even telling her that it was a choice she could help, but she made it anyway. She runs away and then calls it being left behind because that's the evidence that she needs. She can keep being tragic and using that to have a direction for her being, whether she actively thinks about this as the reason or not. Probably without realizing it, she's making herself suffer even more for validity, since suffering is her validity. And further, to try and make up for her sin, she's piling more on top of herself to prove that she must be a good person, to be able to be left, to be abandoned so often and still assist everyone who passes through her life. Only someone really worthy of salvation could do this, right? If she can work harder than anyone, take more pain than anyone, do well more than she's asked, she has to find a day of flight eventually, right? But then each time it doesn't work, so she takes on more, the next step in trying to prove herself in a way that no one ever asked. The pain becomes a need. She faces issues which truly can't be helped to begin with, like her hatching, and those are very valid, but then makes those core to herself and causes them to grow much worse than they ever needed to be. But this would at least make a good person, right? One who's willing to not make their own pain a factor in the lives of others, just as they take on the pain of others. If nothing else, it provides selfless benefit, some tragic embodiment of deontological theory. But what's the real cost of always seeing oneself as worse and working harder to make up for it? Even as this is an attempt to make herself a good person to be saved, it also prevents her from ever seeing herself as that good person and once more creating the cycle. Each act of being good actually shows she's bad and terrible, so she has to be more good, and it never ends until she's worked herself to death. Even as she spends all her days being the most helpful person in Old Home, she could never see her deeds as such. She'll defend her awful nature to the very end because it is what she uses to try and be good. It is the very core of herself. As if she's awful, she has reason to be good, but then if she's good, she has no reason to be, so she has to be awful. We see this in the final episodes, where Rakka confronts her in her studio, now painted wall to wall in a representation of her recurring nightmare, reliving the same tragedy again and again just as she lived her life, each day a reminder of her birth alone. Rakka, trying to help the one who helped her, mentions all the kind and beneficial things Reki did, that she's always been right by her side for anything she could need, never even thinking of herself, that she's loved for everything she did and more just for who she is. But the latter counters by saying she only did these things to try and gain something from it. She was always thinking of herself. She reasoned that if she did everything she could for the next Haibane, whoever it ended up being, she could receive salvation. She could use them as a test. And since it could be anyone, then the only care must be for herself, since it wasn't for a person, just more of a concept, an idea. Being a bad person led her to do good things, but she can never see them as such exactly due to that motivation. So when the time comes for it to matter, it means nothing beneficial. She'll turn down her own salvation when it finally comes knocking. She chases Rakka out of the room with this defense of her self-hatred, more than ever before outright embracing loneliness when given an alternative. The dream starts to come to life and threatens her existence in this world. Of course, the truth is that there's a mixture of selfishness and kindness in her actions. She may have done it in part for salvation, piling tragedy upon her, ruining her life now in the hopes of a better next one, but it still resulted in positive things being done. You can't say the world would have been any better at all had she not done this. Everyone else would have found their lives much harder for sure, at least the other Haibane would have. And even more, not all of these actions can actually be seen as so selfish. Rakka, through finding Reki's diary, recalls when she spoke to her through the cocoon. She talked about what would come next in the birth of a Haibane, the lack of memories and the fear, but that it would be okay and she would have someone by her side, always. In the midst of the chaos of the final episode, it's a calming flashback. The only way you can see this as selfish is if you say that Rakka being prepared would make the first nights easier to take care of her, and to some degree it would. But even so, that doesn't matter in the end. and it might even be better for Reki if Rakka was less prepared, because then it would be more of a challenge and more of a trial to prove herself with. So if that was her intent, she wouldn't have done this. The worse things are, the better she could have appeared. But this isn't what she did. Instead, she gave a gentle warming with true care from the heart. She prepared Rakka for her new life in the most fearful possible time. The thing is, because of her mindset, she can never see it this way. Even when she's doing something truly nice, it has to actually be selfish, because that makes her tragic, gives her more reason to fight against to prove herself, and keeps her showcasing for salvation. Being bad always gives her a reason to be good, but then she can never see when she is because she has to be bad. The effort never ends. She has reason to be, but she'll never be satisfied. And this is where the use of suffering as purpose really comes to be harmful. It isn't just ridding oneself of positive things to leave only negative ones, it's actively making the beneficial ones into detrimental ones too. And this does make it harder to really be pure in intent. If you spend every day believing that what you're doing is selfish, no matter how lacking of thought for oneself it is, then you will eventually start to be selfish, because it doesn't matter how hard you try not to be, you always are. None of your effort actually pays off to make the pain worthwhile. It just focuses you on it to avoid nonsense and keep going, meaning all you'll see is pain, is negative things. All around you, there are people who are finding satisfaction with their lives. In fact, you could argue this is the point of it all. Can you witness this unfairness, come to terms with it, and live to the fullest? Maybe that's what this salvation really is for the Haibane, understanding how to make a personal heaven before reaching it, or how to make this life the best before being granted another. If the others are understanding this, but the observer isn't, eventually they'll start to see salvation itself as something to hate. When you dig so far into tragedy, everyone starts to be luckier, less cursed, leaving you to constantly play catch-up to be as good as they must naturally be. You'll start to hate that it's easy for them, and really it's just that they've made satisfaction with their own pain through their own effort. As happens with Reki, you'll start to be envious of the very fact that they are, even if they themselves are suffering and simply just not enhancing their pain. The communicator tells her that
You must not be envious of Rakka for moving forward.
exactly because of this, all the work she's doing that no one forced her to do creates evidence that she deserves salvation, but only to herself. So she'll be jealous of everyone who receives it and that they didn't choose to do more than what was needed. A girl who fell down a well and broke tradition gets to be saved, but the one who worked her whole life away doesn't? What kind of crap is that? But then, no one asked that of Reki, and Rakka did everything she was asked. You can see this in how they either listen to or don't listen to the communicator. And so Reki does become worse in this way. She comes to truly and fully accept her own words of being awful, and in doing so hurts the others around her. To shove Rakka out of her room in this moment of need isn't keeping her from worrying or allowing her to go free or ridding her of a burden. It's leaving her alone to fear what will happen to a friend. It's a night full of anxiety and anguish, forcing Rakka to go on her own mini journey of pushing through the pain and rejection to be a good person, to force back into that room and be a savior. And it's the same with Nemu earlier. Telling her not to worry and running off will only make her worry more. And so, once again, we see that the idea worsens. It doesn't just impact one, but all of those around them. We see this clearly in that final episode, where Rakka has to try her best to save Reki, but it's also happening across the entire series and Rakka's own arc and struggle with her sins. Like Reki, Rakka started to become sin-bound, spots growing on her wings, which mean her salvation will never arrive. It was triggered by Ku achieving just that with her day of flight arriving, where Haibane disappears into the woods and ascends without a word of goodbye to the others. Much like Reki always feels, Rakka felt abandoned by this, and the reaction of everyone else to seemingly not care only worsens things. Someone disappeared from their lives and things just moved on? Why didn't anyone care about someone who gave her guidance? Someone so kind, someone better than her? We see that the unfairness lacks logic both ways. The good and the bad are nonsensical, because the townspeople's response to this is to be kind to her, as some accidentally insult the recently departed Ku at the same time, like calling her a boy or being glad that she left and not someone else. It's stressing this. Why seem to care so little for her, but be so nice to another? Noticing her struggle, they break the disadvantaged rules the Haibanes are bound by and give her gifts without charge, coming up with mundane reasons as to why. It's not that these acts of kindness are bad, but just that to her they don't make sense. There are people out there much better than her, like Ku who left, but who don't seem to be loved with how little she's missed, or all the others who have their specific jobs they worked so well, and especially Reki who's done so much for her. Out of all of these options, why is Rakka being treated so well? There's no evidence to say she should be in her mind. A free bowl of soup starts to feel more valuable than her life because she has all the reason to see herself as lesser. Or does she really? She went along to everyone else's jobs and took part, putting in actual work from cleaning the places to organization, as well as support in many other ways, from a smile to creative assistance. And she was the newest, still understanding this town and the role she could have in it. There was no way for her to do all of these things yet. She did plenty for the people around her in her context. That's the problem, though, is it was in her context. The issue is that it was less in comparison than her greatest example of Reki. She was doing so much more than Rakka, including taking care of Rakka. How could Reki be sinbound and so often mistreated, belittled by other Haibane even, and yet Rakka, who has done so much less, seems to be treated better? The very fact that she wasn't sinbound in comparison to Reki begins to create the doubt which makes her so. There was no way for her to recognize her own efforts at a reasonable scale when she was looking up to someone whose very purpose was to suffer for others' sake and to never show this fact. It was Reki's very intent to never show suffering, but Rakka has to feel just as bad about this once she knows.
We walk with empty smiles plastered on our faces. Why didn't I realize that sooner? I was always right next to her.
What could have changed things is if Reki was open about it, if she presented herself in true and showed how much she worked, even if it meant owning up to her past mistakes and her sin-bound nature. But she hides it, taking time so often to dye her wings to appear the same as everyone else, hiding her efforts and painting out her frustration alone instead, moving in her cycle. Both her doing too much and her secrecy about its cost led to Rakka feeling just as worthless as Reki, her own cycle of doubt. She always had to do more because she was never enough. Then she suffers from thinking this way and tries harder, leading to Reki having to do more to try and ease her suffering, leading to Rakka feeling like more of a burden and trying hard and more suffering, and it doesn't end as they keep going. Had there been more honesty on either front, this could have been avoided. But in the use of suffering as the means of salvation, both fail and hurt each other. And this honesty is answered in what the communicator explains to Rakka as the circle of sin.
To recognize one's own sin is to have no sin. Now I ask you, are you a sinner?
But if I think I have no sin, then I become a sinner.
So a good person is someone who understands and recognizes their wrongs. They're good from being aware of this fact and acting on it. However, if at any point they begin to think of themselves as a good person, someone without wrongs to recognize, then they are less aware of the wrongs they may commit and become a bad person. So a good person can never believe themselves to be a good person, meaning they'll always be a bad person even if they act good. You can see that this is fitting for both Rakka and Reki's situation, as their perspectives force them to feel awful about their own actions. And this is likely why many of us have negative feelings about ourselves, and why we might work a lot harder than we really need to, and why we might even become worse for it. Because this is true to some degree. Good people tend to be the ones who don't see themselves as good, who have reason to keep trying to be better. Questioning oneself is key to maintaining the awareness required to be beneficial. However, these characters' reaction to understanding this is different and can show us a possibly healthier reaction to it. For Rakka, this talk comes after she's saved from a well where she felt the crows were calling her to. She goes deep into the forest following this feeling and climbs down, but the ladder breaks, leaving her trapped down there with nothing but the bones of a crow. She feels that this is the one from her dream at the very start of the anime, the one which was unable to save her despite trying to tug her up. A single bird just couldn't handle the weight of a whole human, though. With nothing but time down here, she's able to consider and come to terms with these feelings that haunted her enough to climb down. Considering the idea that the birds, the only creatures which can go beyond the walls, are such to bring back things which were lost beyond them, she believes that this was someone from her past calling out, trying and failing to help. And the reason for it was herself, her own idea that she was alone and the refusal to ask for assistance. Because now, with something coming all this way and even dying just to provide her a message, it's undeniable that there was someone who cared enough for her to go through all of this, and so she couldn't have truly been alone. The issue was never loneliness, but the idea of it, the inability to call out. And then, upon escaping with the Toga's help and being greeted by the communicator who expresses the circle of sin, we can see how she puts these concepts together. In this paradox of self-recognition, we see the importance of an outside perspective. Just as she understands the intent of the crow, and as she takes the communicator's words to heart, we see the judgment of others. We could spend all day wondering what is and isn't right, looking in our mind and debating how we can be the best kind of person. But what good is that if the conclusion we come to is something that no one asked for? We saw already that Reki's constant toiling without honesty or communication was harming others even as it helped them on the surface, so this isn't a stretch to say. Then we add back in the crow and the idea of asking for help. If it's true that doing our best for others involves their will, then Rakka's flaw was not providing that will, not giving anyone the means to help her until it was too late, creating her own evidence. The circle of sin, the task of being a good person, can only be solved in the judgment of others then. Did we do what they could have reasonably asked of us, rather than what we decided upon alone? This fixes her own mentality at least, as she can understand that no, she wasn't doing as much as Reki. But no one asked her to. That was an imposition of herself and limited perspective. And since it's from her, she can remove it and begin to feel better about herself. As the communicator provides her work within the walls, and she carries it out with all of its issues and graces alike, she starts to feel more of a sense of calm. She is who she has to be. She isn't making it any tougher than that. So this is what Rakka uses in that final episode to save Reki. When she enters back into that room to dispel her nightmare, she's acting on the words she recalled from the cocoon, where Reki said,
"So please, I'm trusting you to help me, because you are my last hope."
the most she'd ever asked for someone to assist her. This provides Rakka the basis to push further to a degree. She can tell Reki she knows there was a call for help. She now just needs to confirm it, to allow her to help as a good person would when they know and are asked to. She calls out against Reki's past self, a younger version representative of when she truly was alone, hatching onto the cold floor, which is dispelled by the current one which simply asks for Rakka. And in those very minimal words, her friend is finally able to reach out and dispel this nightmare in dramatic fashion. With those simple words, everything ends up okay. It wasn't easy to come to, as Reki expresses a very real fear.
What if I call for help and nobody answers? What if I really am completely alone?
But it was necessary to be open and honest, to set the expectations to a reasonable extent, to give Rakka the means to act, to break the cycle and take a path of value not found in the required suffering of life, but in the one we chose, like the people around us. Because we can always get caught up on those unchanging things, wondering why about the inexplicable nature covering this world. I think in many ways we should hold on to that pain. For those issues whose roots truly can be seen, greed in society, war, discrimination, we should continue to ask why until it changes. But for things that can't be changed, the base nature of life that everyone deals with, what can we really do more than find some way to be satisfied? I think that's what it is for the Haibane, at least. Ku, having a day of flight halfway through the series, doesn't have much time. Her character is quite simple. But I think in that we can see what salvation really is in this world, and I would say it's a sense of satisfaction, really. Ku expresses in a couple ways controlling what we can and coming to terms with what we can't. Not making sense of the nonsense, but accepting the nonsense. She works at the cafe in town because she has to as a Haibane. That can't change. But she can use it for something of her own, taking a small reward aside from her vouchers to feed some of the alley cats with. It's a simple action of kindness which helps fulfill her with the wiggle room that she has. What can she make of her own choice from this work, which isn't her own choice? It's also expressed in what she admits to Rakka about their heights. Sick of being the smallest, Ku wanted someone shorter than her to hatch from the newest cocoon. And then seeing that Rakka was larger, of course she was upset at first. However, she came to understand that had she been any smaller, Rakka would have been a young feather, too separated in status and mentality to be another friend. Since this is simply birthright which can't be helped, she accepts it, instead looks to what's good about it, that she can be a new friend because of her height. She'll take someone being taller if it means they can be together. She admits this all to Rakka, saying she would act as a guide where she could instead, becoming larger in her status since that could be controlled and her size couldn't. Within her bounds, she became the larger one. And it's something that Rakka, as the newest, could reasonably be expected to ask for and appreciate, especially as she was touring everyone's jobs, essentially asking for guidance. From her interactions with the others to herself, was never doing more than what was needed to be done. Not exaggerating suffering to provide purpose, but finding it in another limitation within her bounds. Reki's mistake is letting that unfair suffering come to define her, rather than influence her. It is a part of us, and it should be recognized, acknowledged, and accounted for if possible. We should make things as equitable, taking that all into account. But to make it all of who we are is a disservice in every way, harming not just us, but those around us as well. It prevents us from ever being satisfied, turning the human blessing, which is our drive for more, into a curse, never allowing for those efforts to reach a relaxation, a state of calm and comfort. A bad person has nothing but comfort, but a good one can't completely lack it either, or else they'll just eventually circle around. We all have our bounds. We all have our suffering from the universe's nonsense, and these things will be a large part of us. But we can either be what they make us, or we can be what we make of them. There's no reason to suffer more than what we are already required to. Reki only reaches her day of flight once she realizes this, finds that sense of satisfaction, and moves directly from the nightmare room to this occurrence, completing the task of the Haibane of disappearing off into the woods to never be seen again in that flash of light. And the others are saddened by the loss of someone they love, but they move on as they did with Ku, being happy that they had these moments instead of being sad that they're gone. Even Rakka this time, as she also learned this lesson, a very stark contrast to Ku's departure and a real sign of her growth. We can't help that these things will happen, like losing ones that we love. They have no idea of how or why a day of flight occurs, just that it does. It is chance, in a way. And so dwelling on it is only the first issue again, enhancing the suffering of nonsense. This is what led Rakka down her sin-bound path after all, where she refused to find peace with something which they truly can't have helped, efforts with no end as she cleaned Ku's room again and again, for no purpose more than memories which really could have always been kept anyway if we choose to. It's not that the others didn't care, just that they knew nothing could be done. They could each take one item from her room to remember instead, and continue living once they're ready, not letting go of what was important, but not using it as a tool to suffer either. It's finding that sense of satisfaction. And they probably do the same for Reki too once she's gone. It's all they can do, and all they were ever asked to do, to be satisfied with the things that they could do. To get a bit meta for a moment, my point in making these videos has always been to encourage thought through a bit of a trick, lure people in with something they love, and then introduce them to something they don't, make them consider a new idea that's related to it, or maybe even rethink the basis of why they love that thing. And hopefully, through their own will, it leads them to make a positive change in their life. Something I can't do. I don't know you and your situation. I can't tell you if the words I'm saying will actually assist the exact specifics of how or why you live and have the life that you do. It's going to be different for everyone's situation. All I can do is place the idea in front of you and hope that you do the real work of the task. I'm kind of giving you homework in a way. The task not to speak, but to actually listen. I never actively made the decision that this is what I was going to do here. I'm still trying to analyze my past self and understand why, but the reality of the situation is probably that I was a lonely kid looking to feel valuable through attention. Attention behind the screen, of course, where I could carefully pick my words and all of that. I used to dress up in cat ears and read WikiHow articles or dating quizzes about anime, so it's somewhat of an odd stretch to see that I'm now covering salvation and the line between man and beast and the link between body and mind. It's even more odd then that in most of the videos a couple months or so back, I wasn't really trying to lead you to change your mind, or even to change it myself. No, what it felt like I needed to change was the world. It's an odd and complicated situation pulling from anywhere, from my own insecurities to the downfalls of monetizing your emotions and the grind game of internet content, but whatever the factors are, the reality is that I started to feel like stories alone weren't enough. Everything needed more research, more depth, more power behind it. But I didn't have time to research a deep topic for every video. The series is kind of like what has to be my research in a way. So it came to be more of a situation of tragedy. How could I make the topic as dramatic as possible? So on a video I made called The Necessity of Violence, someone said something to the effect of, "This is pseudo-philosophical nonsense." And that just got to me. Because when I was making it, I felt like if I had the time to properly dig into some philosophy or history or anything and present it alongside with the ideas from those stories, it would have been so much better. I knew what I wanted to do, how much it felt like I had to do, and someone called out exactly that all I was doing was talking about stories. I wasn't going to change the world or any lives. And so something about that comment's wording, about the idea that I was just trying to sound deep and saying nothing, struck me, and I started to think about that comment before every single new topic. Was I just going to be using a lot of words to say nothing and sound smart? I decided that every video, in fact, then did need research, or if not research, at least a topic so overarching, so true to life, so able to change everything that it, transcended the need for research, that it became important enough, it felt like it was researched. Just whatever I could do so that there was no doubt I was saying something important. And this is how, as many of you rightfully pointed out, the videos came to be so draining and dramatic in recent months. But at the time, I wasn't thinking of that. So when I read that comment, I won't say it was the entire motivation for what I'm about to say, but it definitely at least kickstarted it. I set out to make a video that would blow all of the rest out of the water, an hour-plus long research take on a modern and relevant topic, complete with philosophical conclusions drawn from hard evidence and studies. The phrase magnum opus may regrettably have crossed my mind many times alone in my room at midnight. I looked at all the big-name video essay creators, the ones who do this full-time and only put out a video a month, if that, with an editor and co-writer and all that stuff, and I went to embed their styles into what I was doing, making 26 videos a year. I knew it was more than I'd ever have done and should do on my current schedule, but I wanted to do it to prove that comment and my own thoughts that it confirmed wrong. I would be doing much more than was reasonable in every single way, operating the camera and sound by myself while also being in front, researching and outlining and scripting and then editing all together without a single moment of help. I specifically set out to do it this way too. I wanted to know that I could do it by myself with less resources, time, energy, and money than everyone else. I wanted to internally brag to myself, to know that it was all me, that I was the kind of valuable, talented person who could do this. I sat alone in my room, proud that I was making something so big. Stress on that alone part. Pride and loneliness is an odd thing to feel when you really think about it. It's just purposeful inefficiency. Over the course of 3 or 4 months, I started gathering my sources, merging them and their core ideas into an outline, and then throwing out the whole thing to go in a new direction once I realized what not to say from the first wave of research. I bought new equipment so that I could do the sound by myself while I was in front of the also new camera, taking at least an hour of setup just to capture 15 minutes on camera, and then having to do it all again for the next scene, of which I did more than 10 like this, even though most videos only did 3 or 4 in the same outfit and generally in the same location, and with the help of a camera person or sound person, at least one other person there, to not make it take hours. It was all face to camera what I was producing, so to make the video look good, I'd have to do even more behind the scenes with the editing, even though my videos have been doing just fine without any special kind of editing for months at this point, and that took maybe a full week of work time on Premiere Pro to achieve, including a bunch of formats and templates I threw out to get to the one I finally used. I made some 10 thumbnails copying the styles of these big creators, only to end up making a new one with advice from my server instead, because all those ones I did on my own were just days of effort wasted for something that wouldn't register in people's minds when they saw it. The whole thing quickly became even more than I'd intended, and I was pushing everything else aside to get it done. My choices overwhelmed me, and at a certain point I was thinking, God, I'll be glad when this is done. But that thought only comes paired with, because it's gonna give me that boost I need when your work is all in your own hands. When you don't have a boss, when it's just you and you've put so much into it, your perspective skews a bit. To you, it's been your life for months, if not years. But to everyone else, it's just an hour or so. Disappointment comes easy when you forget that imbalance. But in the end, I did push through it, and after 4 months of working on this project I could hang my hat on that would prove I was worthy of doing this thing I did, that despite any unfairness I could always manage, that my efforts as a person were worthwhile, that I could change minds and be someone worthy of the attention I'd always craved, it finally released, and everyone could see what I had made. And then, no one really did. The video flopped, hitting entirely under any of my recent ones. Now, I know 10K is still a lot. I mean, just a couple of years ago, that would have sent me to the moon. I can remember when I first had a video break 300 views, and I wouldn't shut up about it. I was ecstatic in a Sam's Club dairy aisle. I can still picture it all around me. I was literally just a child whose work had finally paid off. But for where I had grown to over all those years, it was disheartening, because now I was putting more into it than I was then, and even more than normal. I usually put 2 weeks into a video, and those will hit 10K. I put months of effort into this one, and it still only hit 10K, and only a little bit later than usual. I know that's still insane. That's still something to be jealous of, and I should be thanking you all for that much more often. It really is so much. But it's just that after months and months of slogging away on this project, I forgot that. I was doing anything and everything to prove myself, even promoting the video beforehand, which I hate to do, and no one really cared to see all of that work. All these things I hated, what was it worth? What was it for? It was supposed to prove that I was worthy of this, did the opposite. When I gave it my all, when I tried something new, it failed. I did so much to try and give people a new idea which would change how they viewed something, impacting our lives and more, and no one cared even though I was trying to make things better. It was months of research and presentation and planning and sweating my ass off to the lights I dragged all around where I live, and it didn't end up meaning shit. I was angry, honestly, that when I put effort in to dispel the negative framing of what I usually did, that no one wanted to see it. That when I did what so many other larger names did, it meant nothing because it was for me. I really struggled to write for weeks after that. I threw out a lot of videos I tried to make, 10-page outline levels of stuff, because it didn't feel worthwhile. Was this really something I wanted to do forever? When I couldn't do something new? Was this something I could do forever then? But as I calmed down from those terrible emotions, I started to see the problem with it all. The most obvious one is that, well, yes, this isn't what people wanted to see from me. There are plenty of other people producing those documentary-level video essays that look and sound beautiful, especially on popular topics. By the time mine came out, so had all of theirs, cycling into everyone's feeds. I was supposed to be a little bit of a break from that, you could say. The person who encouraged people to derive their own thoughts from stories, from things they loved, not told them what to think about a depressing, modern, and impending topic. To expect a nice video about a story and then to see another take on AI isn't something that really engaged with what people desired from me. There were hundreds of better comments on all of my usual videos proving this, saying how much these anime and my words on them meant to people, and I listened to the one comment that went against those. And just to say it, no one feel bad about that video not doing well. You all did exactly what I asked. It has more than double the comments a video that size does. I should be thanking you all for that. Thank you. So part of the issue was probably just that YouTube was being weird about it, and it threw things off the usual. But overall, the anger for its performance should have been at myself because, well, it was a really stupid thing to do. I picked the idea which validated my insecurities, which allowed me to dig deeper into my workaholism and my self-hatred, which let me justify doing the stupid, silly things I wanted to waste time on, and I ran with it. I was doing what no one desired from me but a handful of people who already hated me anyway. That's who I was trying to please? In a way, I had chosen to suffer, because I was secretly that tragic artist kind of person who hopes to breed creativity through nights alone with a breeze through an open window, a blank document, a neat whiskey that no one actually likes, and only 3 hours of sleep. If I really loved myself, I could be the most insufferable person you've ever met, a fake villain in a real world. And that's sort of what I'd let myself fall into a bit more, wallowing in narrative tragedy to reflect my own ideas with gravitas. This idea that I had to do more than what anyone asked of me, that I had to grow and be the best, was terrible. There should be some aspect of it, some element of it to keep us going, but to lean into the pain of it all was silly rather than the benefit of it all. What I should have been doing was incorporating new ideas and elements into what you all actually, well, wanted to see from me. What really made me remember were all the nice but low-key comments on the video after that. Not people saying that it changed their lives, but simply saying, this gave me something to think about. That it made them go, huh, about a part of life they just always took without consideration. When I saw that reaction so much, and how much better that was doing than my self-hatred-driven fake documentary on AI, you all made me remember. That's what it was about, and that's why it did well. I didn't have to change the world. I just had to say one thing that would make you go, huh. I was just talking about stories. But that's perfectly fine. Remembering that has made writing a lot easier and a lot more peaceful. Now, as I sit here in a crappy house at a small desk writing away about silly shows that I love, everything kind of feels as it should be. There's a satisfaction to it, knowing that for who I am and the bounds I'm within, I'm doing the best I can, the best that can be expected of me. Sure, maybe making a small-scale discussion of an anime every 2 weeks isn't everything I dream of, but that's not a bad way to live either. It's certainly a lot better than the other work I do. For the place I'm in right now, it's what makes sense, too. The bigger ideas can come later when I'm actually ready for them. And a large part of this is knowing that there shouldn't be so much pride in loneliness. I was a seriously prideful little shit about having put that video together on my own. I would never be so Somerton as to put my name as every single credit because that's so stupid and pretentious, but internally I was doing a version of that. I would sit back like some proxy overlooking their dome and say to myself, look at how great what you have created is. And some of that was me innocently geeking out about how pretty it all looked and how cool it was to do something new. But part of it was also to feel better about myself. My self-worth number is lower than all the people who put those kinds of videos together. But if I could put one together all by myself, unlike them, then in a way, I was still better, right? Much like doing what people didn't want from me overall, I was also doing it in a way no one asked. Alone. To think that anyone would say, well, it's not valuable unless you do it all yourself is laughable. Imagine looking at a movie and going, yeah, it was good, but it was made by multiple people. It's stupid. I would never say that about people creating things. The fact that they have help is why they can produce such interesting and engaging videos and deeper things. And knowing that, I still decided to do it alone. To be fair, I don't exactly have people who know what they're doing with film equipment I could just call up, or especially not pay at the level I'm at. But literally just having someone to press start and tell me what they saw looked good would have probably halved the time, as I had to get up again and again and again to reset the focus, or the prompter, or the audio, and lug all the lights around, and God, it showed me exactly why each of those things is its own job. I was recording a behind the scenes of it all at first, and then I had to stop because it started to be a little piss baby fit that I was throwing. Know that, if nothing else, I'm good on camera once we start rolling, because for most of those scenes, I was actually pissed off and exhausted behind the scenes because I'd just taken an hour of setup just for the autofocus to fuck me again. How much better could that have been if that wasn't the experience I was having with it? And all of that was just so I could validate my own mindset. To hate myself, but at the same time think I was better than people exactly for hating myself? Didn't they know that suffering was the art? those are the kinds of things that people only say or think when they don't feel like changing the conditions that make them miserable, especially when they can. My biggest flaw is recognizing the changes I need to make and then, well, not doing it. Because it's easier to believe in something like loneliness as a virtue. When I pressed stop on recording for the final time, I did celebrate a bit. It felt really good. But after 15 seconds, it was right back to work with a little more than a hell yeah, because I had a whole studio to get back up the stairs myself. Now, this is going to sound like it's out of nowhere, but follow me for a second here. I've been rewatching Mythbusters recently, and one of the things that I really adore about the series is how excited they all get when something they poured their blood, sweat, and tears into finally pays off and does something amazing. They jump around and yell, they hug each other, they speak excitedly to the camera about it. It seems like the most rewarding thing. Yes, many days were long slogs. You can hear Adam talk about that a lot in tested videos about Mythbusters. But they did it together. They facilitated each other. They had crews working with them, even if they were doing a majority of it themselves. They didn't have to film it. They were focused on something they liked and doing it with people who thought the same way. I come back to the moment after the rocket car succeeded. I think that was the pilot episode even. And Adam and Jamie see each other for the first time post-success, and they share a little acknowledging hug. Two people who weren't even good friends, but did something amazing together. Their bond was how much they could achieve together. I felt hollow that in all the time I was creating things at my own will, I'd never had a moment like that. What I was taking pride in was lacking the most rewarding aspect of the process, while at the same time hamstringing myself from being even better at it. All it would take would be a simple, "Hey, can you help me this day?" text, and I'd get that. It wouldn't be hard at all to take that warm feeling and make it count and share it. But it couldn't happen until I reached out. It's an odd thing, how much we can know things would be easier with help, and the hoops we'll jump through to go without it. Inventing pride where it doesn't exist just to justify our self-created toil. But what was driving this pride and loneliness was also self-hatred. There's a long list of reasons why I work alone, dating all the way back to my earliest years, and I don't have time to get into all of that here. But as you can imagine from how often I repeat the same cycles of learning lessons and not following them, I'm not my biggest fan. So it's always made sense to me that I should do more than others, that I should always be working to reach a common level of value. And in a moral sense, I follow the same principle. I imagine myself to be the worst, so I have reason to be better. Everything I do is awful and selfish so that I can change for the better at all times. And for years, that felt like it was working. I do think there is something true in that, some offshoot of it, that typically if you're thinking about your actions and you're questioning if they're truly good or not, if it's a moral thing to do or not, typically you're okay because you have the awareness to question that, because you're thinking about it. But I don't think we should let that slip into actually thinking that you're terrible, because eventually it does have that side effect where it makes you into what you think yourself to be. Part of why I did this all alone was because I'd reached that point where, from doing so much more than required for so long, I started to think less of other people. When you work with basically 60-hour weeks, considering commuting and lunch and so on, you miss a lot of life. I spent a lot of time on the sideline, seeing people somehow stay out past 10 on a weeknight, incomprehensible to me, frolic in parks on a weekend morning, and getting together on weeknights just to play games or shoot the shit. Meanwhile, for over a year, my life consisted of seeing other humans I enjoyed for 8 hours on a Friday, and wandering the city alone for 8 hours on a Saturday, and nothing more for free time. That was actually it. For a year of my life, I had maybe 20 hours a week that wasn't work or sleep. Honestly, I started to get angry about this. Here I was putting my time and energy into making people think about this topic which would impact their lives, trying to make a difference, and they were all just sitting under the sun in a park. They were playing games together on a Wednesday. They were just building bonds and being happy without me. How stupid and irresponsible of them to use their time like that when there was so much better to be done. When I said I was busy, I actually was, not like everyone else who just used it as an excuse. Not me, I was an adult, doing adult things with responsibilities and too much to do. You know, that very adult thing of talking about anime on the internet. I started to get really envious of anyone who used their time strictly for themselves, because I'd spent so long convincing myself that the one way I could be valuable was from working harder that I really started to believe it. It tainted my whole mindset to the point I was thinking so much less of people who were just finding satisfaction in life, living at peace with the fact that they didn't have to change the world or be famous or even be remembered by anyone. No one asked them to. All they had to do was live and enjoy it. I wasn't any more better, any more worthy of reward. I was just stupid. I was just using my time differently. I was creating these harsh conditions and then blaming other people for not having them. We all have to work. That's a fact of the world we live in. But we don't have to make it our lives and our value. That was something I chose to do, albeit with a lot of social coercion. You can really examine society and see how much work is pushed. But I knew better. I knew that's not how it had to be. And this was a work I distinctly chose myself. I do like it, but combined with day work, it does get to be a lot of time just not spent relaxing. And I could have scaled back at any time, rearranging my days, or I could have made an easier video to get time for those things I was envious of some weeks. But it was easier to dig deeper in, to really grind that mentality into myself and keep working to ignore the truth. To believe what I already did because that was easier than changing my mind. To work alone in false pride, trying to change the world from words about anime in my bedroom on a video sharing website. All things no one asked me to do. There are many things we can't control in life, the nonsense of suffering in the world at large. But all of this was sense, my own, a world that I'd created. Now, don't get me wrong, it's actually been about like a month now, just based on how things have worked out with scheduling videos. I'm okay. There is some truth to the fact that I'm just a little overly dramatic. I just like wordy villains too much, and I can't help that I kind of want to be one. But rest assured, I'm not going anywhere. The mentality shift I've found in all this, that I can be at peace within my bounds, has made me really enjoy putting these videos together still. I'm going to try and change the tone and incorporate some new techniques into what I do now instead of changing it all at once, and I've fully decided that I won't do more than I should unless I ask for help next time. That's going to be the hardest one to stick to. Yell at me if I don't. But Haibane Renmei really struck me because, as you can see, a lot of what I felt about Reki and Rakka's characters came from my own experience. That witnessing it presented in a story allowed me to really look at myself and say, this is what I've been doing. This is the mindset I have and how it led someone to ruin. It's kind of a good reminder of what I was doing in the first place, trying to provide that feeling for other people. The show didn't change my life, but it gave me the little push I needed to say what deep down I knew. And so that's what I'm getting back to. No more trying to change the world bullshit. For now, I'm just the silly, slightly tragic anime person on the silly video website. And you know what? It actually feels pretty good to be. I'm glad to have ended up here. So thank you for letting me be that. And sorry for all those little nasty, selfish thoughts too. If you made it this far into just me speaking about myself, you probably don't care, but I still want to speak the words, I'm sorry, because even if it was just to me, I was pretty damn wrong. I originally thought about not doing this whole ending bit of the video. I thought it was a bit too dramatic and silly and painting myself in a weird way, but I kind of stuck with it just because I think it's important to have a few of those lines where I make what I was thinking over dramatic and then point fun at it and kind of show how silly it was and put it out there so that people know that having those thoughts doesn't make you the worst. It can just be a time of stress, or maybe you're doing too much, that you can find ways to keep what you love and work around them like I'm doing now, where I know I can still do this and still put myself into it, but keeping that in my mind that I don't have to be the best, don't have to do all of this. So I hope that kind of stuff has come across in this. Anyway, you can probably tell that I went off script at the end there for how rambly it got. But thank you for the well over an hour of your time, probably. It really does mean a lot to know that I can put that out there, an hour of just talking about stories and my life and stuff, and people like it. That's crazy. That's insane. Why was I trying to do more? That's already like nonsensically levels of like, oh my God, I get to do that? That's amazing. So yeah, thank you for that. If it wasn't too much, I hope that I'll see you again soon.